A summit on peace in Ukraine kicks off today in Switzerland, bringing together more than 90 countries. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrived in the town of Bürgenstock on Friday evening. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will also attend. The summit aims to create unity around a peace plan put forward by Ukraine. But Russia is not invited, and its main backer, China, is not coming either. The conference is also serving to highlight divisions among the international community about the way forward in Ukraine.
Only together we can stop the madness from Moscow.
Until we deprive Russia of the opportunity to terrorize Ukraine, Putin will have no real interest in seeking a fair peace. But for a fair peace, more must be done.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the road in Stockholm, Berlin, Paris, at the G7 summit in Italy. Always the same message: Ukraine needs more support to stop Russian aggression. At home, Ukraine faces an unrelenting onslaught. Its forces are overstretched and low on ammunition and soldiers, while Russia rains missiles on its cities and makes territorial gains. A stark contrast to the peace summit in the Swiss Alps, where Ukraine's friends are gathering to discuss its peace plan without Russia. Zelensky's 10-point plan includes demands that Russia respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, which means giving back land it has captured by force. It also demands a complete Russian military withdrawal, calls for an international court for Russian war crimes, and reparations. It's not clear if there will be a consensus on the key points, but after the G7 summit, Ukraine can count on long-term support from its closest allies.
A lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now and to deter future aggression anytime in the future.
However, undercutting the Ukrainian plan, Brazil and China have released their own peace plan, calling for de-escalation and dialogue, without naming Russia as the aggressor. Neither country is attending the peace summit. China said it was pointless if both Russia and Ukraine did not participate. Zelenskyy has been diplomatic in responding to China's vague statements.
If China has alternative view on it, it can prepare alternative peace formula. If we share common views on it, like with globally with all the world, I think so. So if they share the same way to peace, we will find dialogue.
Zelenskyy has tried to drum up as much support from the so-called Global South as possible, visiting Singapore and the Philippines last week to meet with leaders. But Zelenskyy was unable to convince many countries from the Global South to join the peace summit and get them to support his plan to isolate Russia. Some have left it unclear or say they will not attend. As the war rages on, it's unclear just how much real progress can happen without involving Russia or China. But organizers say the talks are a start, with the goal of eventually bringing Russia to the table.
And we have our correspondent, Rosie Birchard, in Switzerland with the very latest. Rosie, as we've heard, Russia was not invited. So what exactly can these discussions achieve without them there?
Yeah, Russia was not invited, but also Russia made it very clear as soon as there was any public word of this conference to be planned that it thought it was pointless and that it was not interested in coming in any case. So I think what the organisers are hoping is that this idyllic setting in the Swiss mountains will really give some world leaders some face time away from their domestic politics to try and think about what future peace in Ukraine could look like. They're going to talk about a couple of the less controversial topics. So, for example, humanitarian issues, food security, the return of Ukrainian children, which, while they are still complicated to discuss, they're nowhere near as controversial for all these leaders gathered here as topics like what about the question of where borders lie? And secondly, I think organisers in Ukraine would like to show that there is support for Kyiv here. Russia, on the other hand, has been doing everything in its power to derail this summit.
Now, Rosie, Vladimir Putin has floated a proposal which includes Ukraine abandoning 4 provinces and also dropping any ambitions of joining NATO. Is his vision being considered seriously at all at this meeting?
Certainly not by Ukraine or by its Western allies. For example, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has basically accused Russia of putting this so-called proposal out just on the eve of this summit in order to kind of distract from it. And I think analysts would say that is part of a broader Russian plan here, because not only has Russia put out this so-called peace proposal, which of course basically asks Ukraine to capitulate and give over its territory, it's also been putting pressure on many countries worldwide and its partners to not show up to this summit. And really, one of the big questions looming ahead of these talks was who is going to be on that final guest list. I was looking at it just as it was released, and there are around 57 heads of state here overall and about 95 countries represented, but there are some really notable absences when it comes to diplomatic big hitters from Asia, Africa, Latin America. So for example, South Africa, Brazil, India, Indonesia have all chosen to either send diplomats or ministers instead of heads of state. And I think that will be seen by many as a snub here. Still, organisers saying, look, the fact that we've managed to gather so many countries here does in itself show that there is a rallying around the idea of trying to broker an end to this war, which of course continues to drag on, and Ukrainians still fighting to defend their territory.
So just to be clear, do you think there is any chance of seeing another proposal for a peace plan coming out of this summit?
So what I have heard from sources that I've been speaking to here is that there is a declaration being drafted. So there should be a text which is signed by countries that are present here. But I've been told that this is probably going to be pretty weak in terms of the wording it's used, because of course when you're trying to get an agreement on a text between 90 or 95 countries, you're going to have to word it very carefully in order to get the backing of each one of them, particularly those countries in the so-called global south that have been walking an ever narrower tightrope trying to show support for the West, but also not to distance themselves too much from Russia and particularly China. China, of course, a big player, which is not at this conference. So some sort of a declaration, but of course really organisers know that this is not going to be a conference where peace is brokered. Russia is not at the table. It's about laying the ground for future talks. But certainly I think a case of kind of high stakes with that war dragging on, but relatively low expectations in terms of what's actually going to come out of this conference.
Our correspondent Rosie Birchard in Switzerland. Thank you so much.